Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Ocean Expert Exchange. Scientists in every Florida school and the ANGARI Foundation are proud to be partnering again this fall to continue to bring you this great series. In this series, we dive into all things marine science and technology and tell you a little bit about what's happening in the field. Today, we'll be talking with Agnesa Lundy about mangroves, and we'll introduce you to her very shortly. The Scientist in Every Florida School program is housed within the University of Florida's Thompson Earth Systems Institute. And the program connects and builds long-term partnerships between teachers and scientists in order to bring current scientific research and big data into classrooms in Florida and beyond. The ANGARI Foundation is a nonprofit headquartered in West Palm Beach, Florida. And the foundation supports and promotes all things marine science research-based as well as education. And many of the foundation's primary initiatives involve its 65-foot research vessel, the RV ANGARI. In case you missed it at the top of the previous slides, we'd like to remind you that you can leave questions for the scientists by typing them in the chat box today. And we'll also be providing a survey at the end of today's session in order for you to have an opportunity to get some really cool swag. So be sure to take part in that survey. And at this time, we'd like to introduce to you Agnesa Lundy from Braun Limited. Agnesa, can you tell us a little bit about yourself as well as about your work? Thanks.
Hello, thank you so much for the introduction. Happy to be here. Thank you everyone for your time this Thursday afternoon. So I am a senior environmental scientist at Braun Limited and also a postgraduate student at Manchester Metropolitan University. So next slide, please. So at Braun, which is an environmental and engineering consultancy firm, my work really focuses on conducting marine surveys to help inform environmental impact assessments and environmental management plans. The really interesting part about that is developing unique mitigation strategies for the impacts associated with different developments. In my former roles at the Bahamas National Trust and the Nature Conservancy, I worked with mangrove and coral reef restoration, project management, strategic planning and fundraising, and I've actually done a lot of community engagement as well. So now that you know who you're talking to, what are we going to be talking about? I'm going to give you just a general overview of mangroves and discuss the issues related to mangroves and possible solutions. And then I'm going to introduce my research on population genetics, and then we can field questions at the end. Next slide, yes. So what are mangroves? Mangroves are basically a group of plants that grow in the tropical environment around the world in the intertidal or coastal zone. Right? They are considered a foundation species and they are halophytes. So halophytes are salt-loving plants, so salt plants. You know, a foundation species is a species that really influences the community within the environment, right? The presence of mangroves in an area allows the environment or makes the environment more hospitable to different species. So that's what that means. There are about 50 species of mangroves worldwide, but in the Bahamas, there are only 4 types. They are the buttonwood, the white, the black, and the red mangrove. The buttonwood, you go to the next slide, please. The buttonwood grows, is found on is the most furthest inland of the mangroves, and after the mangroves, after the buttonwood, you would find the white mangroves. After the white mangroves, then you'd find the black mangroves. After the black, you would find the red mangroves growing directly in the seawater. And between those different layers of mangroves, if you will, in an ecosystem, you definitely would have a blend as the mangroves start to transition into the different type of mangrove. So next slide. So my work is focused on the red mangrove, the Rhizophora mangrove. If you look at the center photo, you'll see the very predominant prop root structure, those reddish tinted roots. Most people believe that is how the red mangrove got its name, because of that reddish hue. And around the photos around that center image shows the different reproductive stages of the red mangrove. So you have the flower, and then you move straight around through to the propagule. The propagule is the long pods, if you will, that are hanging on the tree. And these are very unique to the red mangrove. This is actually not just a seed, it is actually a young tree. So the seed, the red mangrove seed, has actually germinated on the tree. So when this propagule falls, it is actually ready to grow right away. As soon as it hits the sediment and it can get upright, orient itself upright, it can begin to grow. And that's one of the very cool adaptations of the plant that helps improve its success rate and viability in the environment. Okay, next slide. So what are the functions of mangroves? So they are a foundation species, but how do they do this, right? So they preserve the biodiversity. They mitigate climate change. They protect against storms, prevent erosion, and they can also filter sediments and pollutants. Next slide. So the issues in the mangrove community, what are the problems? What are the threats, right? So mangroves have declined globally since the 1900s by 50%. Within the last 2 decades, they've declined 35%. So it is a global issue. It's not an issue that is unique to the Bahamas. And the issues are global. So the factors that are leading to the decline in the Bahamas are the factors that are leading to the decline globally. These are just a few. These are the more predominant ones that I listed here. So we have invasive species. 3 examples are casuarina, scaevola, and melaleuca. And the top photo on the right side, you can see the casuarina. The casuarina is the really tall trees, and the shorter trees below the casuarina are the scaevola. I don't have a photo of the melaleuca, but the problem with the melaleuca is it actually dries up wetlands as it grows. It absorbs a lot of water. Okay, and invasive species grow faster than the mangroves. So once they become established in an ecosystem, they tend to outgrow or outcompete, is a term that we like to use. They outcompete the native species, the red mangrove, and they take over the environment, displacing the red mangrove. So that is what the concern is with invasive species. We also have urbanization and development. This is leading to clearing, just widespread clearing of mangrove systems. And that's the center photo. That's actually in Bimini. You can see an excavator has just cleared down the mangrove area. You also have diseases and pollution, and that's the other 2 photos on the far left. That's actually a photo of a dieback in Abaco. There was a disease a few years ago, a graduate student discovered, and she has been working with some partners on that island, trying to study that and investigate what exactly is happening with that. In the last photo on the right, just in one photo, there's 9 pieces of debris or trash in the mangrove. So that actually impacts the environment because it doesn't make it hospitable. It makes it inhospitable to the animals that would live in the mangrove forest. Climate change and stronger hurricanes is also an issue for the mangrove community. I know it may be a little bit confusing because I just said in the last slide or the previous slide that climate change, mangroves can help mitigate against climate change. And on this slide, I'm saying that climate change is an issue, right? So the benefit of mangroves as it relates to climate change, they sequester carbon, right, in the sediment. They store the carbon is stuck in the sediment and it's not available in the atmosphere to alter the global climate. Okay, that's how it helps. That's how it's helpful. The issue with climate change is going to alter rainfall patterns, and that is going to dilute the salt water in some areas, making the formerly predominant mangrove area more hospitable to other species. So other species will come in, potentially grow faster than the mangrove and outcompete them for their environment, right? And then you have less mangroves. Another factor related to climate change is you'll have sea level rise. And I know it may seem a little bit strange because I'm going to say that's going to cause flooding of the mangroves, and mangroves are the intertidal zone. They're used to flooding. But the fact is they are used to periodic flooding, right? So as at high tide, there's flooding. At low tide, they are going to be dry. So they're used to that. They've adapted to that. They've evolved to that over time. But with sea level rise, potentially the mangroves are going to be underwater for 24 hours, right? So they're going to flood and then they will die. Okay, so next slide, please. So why is this a real issue? Why should we care? If we don't have mangroves available to provide the ecosystem services or the functions that I just described, then we won't have those ecosystem services. We won't have those functions. So if we don't have breeding grounds, nursery, feeding grounds for the fisheries, then we won't have the fisheries. If we don't have the mangroves to filter the debris from the water or from the land, then the debris is going to either go into the ocean or come on land. If we don't have the mangroves to dissipate the wave energy and the wind energy during storms, that full impact of the storm is going to be experienced by us, by the community inland. Okay, next slide, please. So what are the possible solutions, right? Possible solutions are conserve and restore, okay? Conserve, we protect what we have already. Restore, we try to repair the damage that was done where possible. So in the Bahamas, we have laws and policies that protect against mangrove clearing. We have established protected areas. We have begun informing the public about the importance of mangroves, and we do have laws that prevent dumping in the mangroves. For restoration, where we want to repair the damage, we have different projects that have reconnected mangrove creeks, we've replanted mangroves in certain areas, and we've removed debris. So my research is really focused on how do we do these two things in the best way possible? How do we try to solve the problem of losing our mangroves in the best way? How do we have the most success at what we're trying to do? And that is where the population genetics comes into play. So next slide. So my research is twofold, right? The first is really looking at how do we look at the population genetics of red mangroves. And through my work at Manchester Metropolitan University, the team, we developed a multiplex of microsatellite markers. It's really something that helps you look at the genetic diversity across an individual and compare it to all the different individuals in an area. So I'm going to try to explain it a little bit more. So if you look at the graph, you see beautiful colors and shapes. The green triangle represents samples collected from Managua. The red circles represent samples taken from New Providence, and the blue squares represent samples taken from Florida. Okay. So as you can see on the graph, all the shapes and colors are grouped together, right? So all the blue, all the Florida samples are similar to one another. All of the New Providence samples are similar to one another. All of the Managua samples are similar to one another. However, you very rarely see the Managua samples going to the New Providence samples or the Managua samples going over to the Florida samples. You do have two individuals, right? So you do have one Florida sample that looks very similar to the New Providence, right? And then you have one Managua sample that looks very similar to the Florida samples. So what the first part of my research shows is it is possible to use microsatellite markers in a multiplex to determine differences in populations. And as you can see there, it's pretty different, right? Florida is different from these two islands that were sampled in the Bahamas. So next slide, please. The other part of my research was really exploring the genetic structure throughout the Bahamas or within the Bahamas. So through collaboration, I had a lot of help with sample collections over the years. So I was able to collect samples or analyze samples from Grand Bahama, way up in the northern Bahamas, which is where the red dots are, all the way down to the southern Bahamas, which is where the blue dots are, by Inagua. Okay. So all of the symbols represent sample locations. The colors represent different climate types. So on the Köppen-Geiger climate classification regime, there are 3 different climate types within the Bahamas. And it's one country, right? We are an archipelago that stretches within the North Atlantic Ocean. And most people would think that the weather that you experience in one place you experience in the other, but that's not the case. In the northern Bahamas, we typically call them Pine Islands. And in Grand Bahama, which is where the red dots are, and in northern Abaco, that's one climate type called tropical monsoon. They experience a lot of rain, and it's generally cooler than the rest of the Bahamas. In the central Bahamas, where we have the green samples, that is a tropical savanna climate type. There is some rain. It is moderately cooler, relatively speaking. And then in the southern Bahamas, where you have the blue dots, is very hot, very dry, and the climate type is arid steppe hot. So I do have samples from each of those areas. And if we look at the map on the next slide, we will see that there is some differentiation within the Bahamas on the population genetics, right? So there's structure. There seems to be some correlation based on the different climate types. So in the northern Bahamas, you see a lot of green in the pie charts. This is representative of group B, right? So all the samples that were collected on these islands, they had a stronger chance of being from group B. If you look at the southern Bahamas, you see a lot of purple. This is group D. So the samples collected from the southern Bahamas is a little different, or appears different from the samples collected in the northern Bahamas. And if you look in the middle, there's a lot more mixing happening, right? So you see a lot more red, a little bit of purples in there. But generally you see 4 colors, you see 4 different groups. And the 4 groups were determined using clustering analysis, sorry. And you can click this to show, so what's causing the structure? And you have the yellow arrows are going to show, the larger yellow arrows on the slide show the major ocean currents that are around the Bahamas. And right, so you have the Gulf Stream between Florida and Bimini, and then you have the Antilles currents on the outside of the Bahamas, and then between Cuba and Andros. And if you go to the website that was just up, you can see there's ocean currents, more intricate, more dynamic ocean currents within the Bahamas, all the little swirls, all the little movements. So potentially, the red mangrove propagules, because remember, they can last up to a year. They're viable for a year, right, after they drop from the tree. So potentially, the propagules could float on the ocean currents to another island and populate that area or reseed that area. So the water movement may be a reason why there is such distinct structures or such distinct groupings of mangroves in the Bahamas. Okay, next slide, please. So what does this mean? So remember, I wanted to help inform conservation. I wanted to help inform restoration, right? So for conservation, how do we protect what we already have, what we have now, right? So in the protected area system, the map shows the current protected area system of the Bahamas. And we want to ensure that we have some representation of each of those different groups, each of those 4 groups within the protected area system, to ensure that we are protecting as much of the biodiversity that is available in the country as possible. Okay. How does this information help with restoration, right? So if you remember, I said that mangroves were a foundation species, and the basis of a foundation species is basically its genetics. Its anatomy is based on the genetics. So if we want to restore an area to provide the ecosystem services that we like, the ecosystem services that we enjoy, we want to make sure the foundation species is as diverse as possible, but it should be as similar to the genetic composition as it was before the impact, before it was damaged. so that the species that rely on it and provide the so that the system can provide the ecosystem services that we want it to. And that photo just shows, the photo below just shows some red mangrove propagules that I had collected. Okay, next slide. So as I mentioned, this is the research was definitely a collaboration. It's not a one-woman band. So the logos just show how many people were involved in conducting this work, and I thank all of them, and I thank everyone who took the time out this Thursday to hear what I had to say. I really appreciate it, and I can take questions. I see the chat has a lot going on.
Agnesa, thank you so much for sharing your work with us today. We really appreciate your time and for you telling us all about the amazing work that you're doing. We're going to transition over to the Q&A portion of today's presentation. So if anybody who is in attendance, whether it's on Zoom or watching via YouTube, feel free to write any questions that you have in the chat box, and I'll be sure to ask on your behalf. Our first question is from Layla, and she says, I've seen mangrove propagules grown in jars of water. Do mangrove propagules require sediments to grow?
That is a great question. I actually have some propagules and water in my window in my room right now. No, they don't require sediment to grow, right? Actually, they grow pretty well in water initially because they have germinated on the tree. They have all of the wonderful nutrients and everything that it needs to grow to become a mangrove independent of its mother while it's still on the tree. So when you put it in water, it already has everything in it to jumpstart. So you can put it in water and it'll begin to grow fine. I hope that answers the question.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Our next question is from Lindy, who is curious and says, I have a question related to the relatedness of mangroves in northern Bahama Islands and South Florida. How are they related? How are they connected? Are they really far away from each other in terms of biodiversity, in terms of what they support and what they're made up of? I'm assuming.
Okay, so the first part of my research where I showed the graph that had Anagua, New Providence, and Florida, it showed that it was very distinct. And if you look at the ocean currents and the climate, it is very unlikely that propagules would float over the Gulf Stream, which is a very strong current on the coast of Florida. It's very unlikely that those propagules would float over that into West Grand Bahama or even to Bimini. And the data shows that it's just distinct groupings. The northern Bahamas is actually more closely related to the central Bahamas, which is the islands that are just in the line below the northern Bahamas. Yeah, so this was the graph that I was referring to.
Perfect. Our next one comes from Karen, who says, you mentioned reconnecting mangrove creeks as a restoration tool. What exactly is a mangrove creek?
Oh, I'm so sorry. Okay, so in the Bahamas, we have a lot of, we have inland mangroves. They grow around like a lake or a pond, if you will. We also have coastal mangroves that grow on a beach directly in the ocean. And then we have these little channels. It's not really a river. We don't have rivers in the Bahamas, right? It's these little channels of salt water that break up the island or that run from, like on Andros Island, they run from east to west, and we call them creeks. And mangroves tend to grow right on the edges of those creeks. So historically, what has happened is we have, when we needed to make roads in the country, we would build a road right through a mangrove creek because they're right on the coast and it's easier to access. It's cheaper to have your heavy equipment right there instead of trying to cut through the forest and build a road further inland. So this is, this is before we had research. This was a long time ago. We know better now. We don't do this now. Okay, I just want to say that. So now that we know better, we're trying to reconnect both sides of the mangrove creek. So you can put culverts under the road to actually help the water flow between both sides under the road.
Thank you. Eusebius asks, do you think this genetic diversity can be used in Florida at all?
Yes, there's actually my lab mate, his name is John Paul Kennedy, who's on the paper with me. He actually is my mentor in the lab. He has done a lot of work on population genetics in Florida on red mangrove and black mangrove.
Thank you. Teresa writes in and says, might the invasive species provide the same or some of the same benefits provided by mangroves?
Well, that's a very interesting question, and I really love it because I get it a lot. So invasive species they could provide some ecosystem services, some benefits, but in the places where they're supposed to be, right? So invasive species are invaders. They are bad for this new place that they have decided to grow. So no, they will not provide the same ecosystem services as the red mangroves.
Okay. And Tina is asking, are you actively involved with replanting mangroves following major hurricanes at all?
Yes, I am. So I'm working with the Bahamas 100,000 Tree Planting Initiative, and I am leading or helping to lead the coastal arm of that, which involves mangroves, the 4 different types of mangroves, and some sand dune plants.
I think Melanie feels inspired and she wants to help out more. She writes in and says, is there a guide to growing mangroves? Who would we contact to help with restoration efforts?
Okay, so the first thing is it depends on where you are, right? In the Bahamas, I would say you can contact the 100,000 Tree Planting Initiative. We're on Facebook, Instagram at Sustain Your Belly, or you can contact the Bahamas National Trust. You can also contact Bonefish, Tarpon, and Trust. They're based in Grand Bahama. They are actually leading a lot of the northern Bahamas restoration after Hurricane Dorian. If you are, they have a branch in Florida as well, I believe, Bonefish, Tarpon, Trust, and a group called MANG, M-A-N-G. In another couple of months, I'll launch a different restoration project. I'll share the information with you guys when it happens as well.
Thank you. Perfect. As we begin to wrap up, our next question is from Stephanie, who asks, do I need a permit to collect mangroves?
Yes, yes, you do. You need a permit from the Department of, well, in the Bahamas, you need a permit from the Department of Environmental Planning and Protection and the Forestry Unit.
Elena asks, I know there are mangroves in the Bahamas and Floridas. Where else around the world can I find them?
In the tropical belts around the globe. So Indonesia, the Philippines, all around.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And Dylan asks, do you find mangroves in less salty, brackish, and freshwater also?
Yes, yes, you do.
Perfect. All right. Our last question will be from Nolan, who says, if you find a propagule floating, should you stick it in the sediment? Is that helpful? What should we do in that situation?
Yes, you can stick it in the sediment. It'll grow.
All right. Well, Agnesa, thank you so much. And I guess my last question to you would be, just in general, are there any final thoughts that you have? We've learned so much today, but is there anything that you would like our attendees to know? Any concluding remarks from you?
No, not really. I just really want to say thank you for spending your Thursday with me.
Oh, it was our pleasure. And thank you so much. We really enjoyed having you and learning from you. At this point, I'll turn things over to Stephanie so she can provide her concluding remarks to today's presentation. Thank you again.
Thanks, Brian, very much. And before I give, we got a little feedback there. Before I give final thanks to Agnesa and everybody for joining us, I just wanted to say that Elise is going to be posting several of the links within the chat box so that you have the opportunity to grab those before we finish and wrap things up. But again, a huge thank you for joining us on the call today to explore mangroves. What a powerhouse plant they are, or tree, essentially. We really appreciate Agnesa for sharing her restoration work with us today. And we want to let you know that there's K-12 extension resources related to today's topic, and they'll be made available along with a recording of today's topic in case you'd like to revisit that or share it with classrooms. You can find it at the UF Earth Systems YouTube channel. And once again, we appreciate you joining us. You can find more information about the Scientists in Every Florida School program, as well as the ANGARI Foundation, by visiting the websites and social media that you see here on your screen now. And we'd like to remind you to take the survey to get a chance for some of that swag we talked about at the top of the hour there. And if you can't get enough about mangroves, we want to also let you know that there's a great event happening tonight at 7 p.m. as part of the Thompson Earth Systems Institute and the Florida Museum Science Off Tap series on mangroves as well. It's a mangrove sort of day. The link for that can be found in the chat box. And I think we'll take just a moment to make sure everybody can grab what they need out of that chat box. And with that, we'll say again, thanks and goodbye.